The dusty fairground of Copper Bend fell silent when the Apache warrior stepped forward to accept the challenge. His Winchester rifle gleaming in the Nevada sun as the crowd watched a white woman trembling on the platform. Her wrists bound with iron shackles, and nobody expected what happened when he pulled that trigger. The outskirts of Copper Bend sprawled across the desert floor like a wound that refused to heal. Weathered tents and wooden platforms baking under the merciless Nevada Territory sun. Dust hung perpetually in the air, coating everything with grit that tasted of alkali and desperation. The smell of unwashed bodies, cheap whiskey, and animal dung clung to the crowd gathered around the central platform. Tahir Warhawk moved through the chaos with the measured stride of a man who had survived worse. His tall frame cut an imposing figure, broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist. Muscles honed by years of riding hard country and fighting harder men. He wore buckskin pants and a faded cavalry shirt. His long black hair held back by a strip of red cloth. A single eagle feather marking him as a warrior of distinction. His face bore the angular features of his Apache people. High cheekbones and a strong jaw, but his eyes drew the most attention. Dark as obsidian and equally hard, they held the cold intensity that made men step aside without thought. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw. A souvenir from a cavalry saber at 17. At his hip rode a Colt revolver, its grip worn smooth from use. They called him the Blood Rider because when he came for someone, he left a trail of red in his wake. He had come to Copper Bend because his horse threw a shoe 20 miles back. He needed supplies and a blacksmith before heading back into the mountains where he made his camp. Towns brought trouble, but sometimes necessity outweighed caution. The crowd's noise intensified near the center of the fairground, drawing his attention despite his intention to avoid entanglements. Tahir recognized the particular quality of laughter, the cruel edge that accompanied human suffering presented as sport. His jaw tightened, but he kept walking, not his business. Not his problem, a voice boomed across the fairground. The speaker stood on a raised platform, a florid-faced man in a stained waistcoat and derby hat, his guts straining against brass buttons as he gestured grandly. A showman's smile plastered across features that spoke of too much drink and too little conscience. 6 cans, 6 shots, the man bellowed, hit them all straight and clean. And you win yourself a virgin servant, genuine article. Young and pretty enough to warm any man's bed or work his household. Certified by the territorial magistrate as legal property under the Indentured Servitude Act. Tahir stopped walking, something in those words hooking into him despite his better judgment. He angled toward the platform, using his height to see over the shorter men blocking his view. What he saw made his hands curl into fists. A young woman stood on the platform. Her wrists locked in iron manacles connected by a short chain. The metal had rubbed her skin raw, leaving angry red welts. She wore a dress that had once been fine, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar. But time and rough treatment had reduced it to rags. Tears in the fabric exposed her shoulders and arms. Dirt covered the skirt. Her hair was the color of honey in sunlight. Long waves tumbling past her shoulders in tangled disarray. Her face held delicate features, high cheekbones, a straight nose, full lips that trembled despite her obvious effort to remain composed. But her eyes caught and held Tahir's attention. They were pale blue-gray. And they held a quality he recognized immediately. The hollow emptiness of someone who had endured too much for too long. The same look he had seen in Apache children after the long walk. In warriors who survived battles that killed their brothers. In his own reflection after soldiers massacred his family. She stood with shoulders back and chin lifted, refusing to bow despite the chains and leering crowd. Dried tear tracks marked her cheeks, but she was not crying now. She had moved beyond tears to that place where survival required a kind of numbness. A shutting down of everything that made degradation unbearable, the showman. Virgil Crow, according to the hand-painted sign beside the platform, strutted back and forth calling to the crowd. Who wants to try their luck? Only $2 for 6 shots. Win yourself a household treasure, completely legal and binding for 7 years. Men pressed forward, coins in hand, their faces flushed with alcohol and something darker. Tahir watched them with growing disgust. None of them saw a person on that platform. They saw property, an object to be won and used. The woman's eyes swept across the crowd with the wary awareness of prey surrounded by predators. Her gaze passed over Tahir and then snapped back. Something in his appearance catching her attention, perhaps his Apache features. Perhaps the way he stood apart from the eager crowd. Their eyes met across the dusty space. And Tahir felt something shift in his chest, recognition of a kindred spirit. Someone else who had been marked by violence and loss. He did not know her story, but he knew suffering when he saw it. The first contestant stepped up, a heavy-set miner who paid his $2 and took the offered rifle. An old Sharps carbine with a loose action and knocked askew sights. He fired wildly, hitting nothing. His remaining shots went wide, striking dirt and sending up small puffs of dust. 3 more men tried and failed. One hit 2 cans. Another hit 3 before his nerve failed. The woman on the platform watched each attempt with growing dread. She knew that someone would eventually succeed, and then her fate would be sealed. Tahir found himself walking toward the platform without consciously deciding to move. His feet carried him forward while his mind screamed warnings about getting involved. But his feet kept moving, and he found himself standing before Crow. Pulling coins from his pocket, the showman's eyes widened as he took in Tahir's appearance. The Apache features, the weapons, the hard eyes that promised violence. Well now, Crow said. Looks like we have an Indian who thinks he can shoot. The words fell flat. Something in Tahir's expression killed the humor before it could take root. $2, Tahir said, his voice low and rough from disuse. He spoke English with only the faintest accent. He placed the coins on the table with deliberate precision, never taking his eyes from Crow's face. House rules say you got to use our rifle, Crow said, indicating the battered Sharps. Tahir cut him off with a look that could have frozen blood. Then adjusted the sights, he said. That weapon could not hit the ground if you dropped it. Tahir took the rifle, examining the weapon. It was worse than he thought. The barrel slightly bent, the action loose. The sights deliberately misaligned to make winning nearly impossible. This was not a game of skill, but a rigged attraction designed to part fools from their money. He looked up at the platform, at the woman watching him with an expression caught between hope and despair. She had seen others fail, had no reason to believe he would succeed. But something in her eyes begged him to try anyway. The crowd fell quiet as Tahir raised the rifle. Even the drunks sensed that something different was happening. This was a warrior preparing for battle. And warriors did not miss. Tahir's world narrowed to the rifle, the targets, and the space between them. He blocked out everything except the cold mathematics of trajectory and compensation. He breathed slowly, deeply, centering himself the way his grandfather had taught him. A warrior must become empty, no fear, no anger, no hope. Only the target and the path to the target. The first shot cracked across the fairground. The leftmost can exploded off its post. Hit dead center with enough force to send it spinning 20 feet. The crowd stirred, surprised murmurs rippling through the packed bodies. The second shot followed with barely a heartbeat between them. Another can shattered, this one at twice the distance of the first. Now the crowd pressed closer, sensing something rare. Men who had been laughing fell silent, watching the Apache warrior with growing respect and fear. The third can fell, then the fourth. Each shot placed with mechanical precision. Tahir's face remained impassive. But inside his heart hammered, not from fear of missing, but from the growing certainty that he was about to change his life in ways he could not predict or control. The fifth shot rang out, and the Fifkin spun away, leaving only one target remaining, the furthest one, set at a distance that would challenge even a good rifle in skilled hands. With this damaged weapon, it should have been impossible. Tahir lowered the rifle slightly, his eyes finding the woman on the platform. She stared back at him, her lips parted, her breath coming in short gasps. Her hands gripped the chain between her manacles so tightly her knuckles showed white. He raised the rifle again, made one final adjustment, and fired. The can leaped off its post as if yanked by an invisible hand, tumbling end over end before landing in the dust 30 yards away. For a moment no one moved, no one breathed. The impossible had just happened before their eyes. Then the crowd erupted, half in cheers, half in angry protests. Men who had lost money demanded to see the rifle. Through it all Tahir stood motionless, the smoking rifle hanging from one hand, his eyes locked on the woman. Crow's face had gone from red to white to purple in rapid succession. While he said, his voice strangled, "Looks like we have a winner." He produced a key and snapped at an assistant to unlock her. The iron fell away from her wrists. She rubbed the raw skin gently, wincing at the contact. Tahir climbed onto the platform, ignoring the crowd's noise. Up close he could see the hollow of her cheeks from too little food, the bruises on her arms, the way she held herself as if expecting a blow. The knowledge kindled a cold fury in his chest. The assistant started to grab her arm, but Tahir's hand shot out, catching the man's wrist in a grip that made him yelp. "Touch her again and lose the hand," Tahir said quietly, the words more terrifying for their lack of emphasis. Tahir looked at the woman. She met his gaze without flinching. Fear lived in her eyes, but also a spark of defiance. "You walk with me if you choose," he said, speaking slowly and clearly. "I do not own you. No one owns you. I am getting you away from here." She stared at him as if he had spoken in an unknown tongue. Men did not talk to servants that way. This had to be a trick. She searched his face for the trap, but his expression did not change. He simply waited, patient as stone. Finally she nodded, once, sharp and quick. A decision made. Tahir stepped back, giving her space to move on her own. She walked past him carefully, willing to take the chance. As they moved toward the platform's edge, Crow stepped into their path. "Hold on now, there is paperwork to be done. She is legally bound to serve for 7 years. Tahir's hand moved to his revolver, not drawing, just resting on the grip. "We are leaving," he said. "Step aside." Crow stepped aside with ill grace, his face twisted in impotent rage. "This is not over," he spat. "There are laws, contracts." But Tahir was already moving, and the woman followed. They walked into the crowd which parted before them. No one was foolish enough to stand in the Blood Rider's path, not when his hand rested on iron and his eyes promised death. They walked away from the fairground in silence. The woman stayed close but not touching, her body language speaking of wariness despite the rescue. She had learned not to trust. Survival had taught her that kindness was often cruelty's mask. Tahir understood her caution. He kept his pace slow, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. She needed time to understand that he meant what he had said, that she was not property to be used but a person to be protected. As they reached the edge of town he finally spoke. "I have business at the blacksmith. My horse needs shoes, then we leave this place." She nodded but said nothing. Tahir led her toward the livery stable where he had left his horse that morning. The building leaned slightly to the left, its boards weathered gray by sun and wind. Inside the stable, the smith looked up from his work, his eyes widening as he took in Tahir and his unexpected companion. The smith's gaze lingered on her torn dress and bruised wrists, understanding dawning in his expression. "My horse ready?" Tahir asked. The smith nodded. "Yeah, just finishing up." He gestured to a stall where Tahir's paint horse stood. Fresh shoes gleaming on its hooves, Tahir inspected the shoeing job carefully. Satisfied, he paid the smith and began saddling the horse. The woman watched from near the door, her arms wrapped around herself despite the heat. She looked lost, adrift in a situation she did not understand. "There's a room above the stable," the smith said quietly, jerking his head toward a ladder. "Not fancy, but it has a door that latches. Figure you might need it for a few hours. Get your bearings before heading out." Tahir considered the offer. They did need time. The woman looked ready to collapse, and he needed to think about their next move. "How much?" he asked. Smith waved off the question. "Already paid for the shoeing." "That covers it." He turned to the woman, gestured toward the ladder. "You can rest up there, door locks from inside. I will bring water and food." She looked at the ladder, then at him, searching again for the trap. But he simply waited, patient and still, until she finally moved toward the ladder and climbed. The loft was small but clean, a narrow bed against one wall, a washstand with a chipped basin, a single chair beside a window. She stood in the center of the space, her hands hanging at her sides, looking young and terribly fragile in the afternoon light. "I will be downstairs," Tahir said from the doorway. "If you need anything, call out. I will hear you." She turned to face him, and for the first time since the platform she spoke. Her voice was soft, cultured, speaking of education now stripped away by circumstance. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "What do you want from me?" The questions hung in the air between them, weighted with fear and desperate need to understand. Tahir met her pale eyes with his dark ones, seeing the damage that men had done to her. "Nothing," he said simply. "I want nothing from you. I saw someone who needed help. I helped, that is all." She stared at him, tears beginning to well in her eyes. No one had said such a thing to her in so long that she had forgotten it was possible. That kindness without cost could exist in this brutal world. Tahir turned to go, giving her privacy for the breakdown he sensed coming. As he reached the ladder, her voice stopped him. "My name is Ophelia," she said. "Ophelia Bancroft." He looked back at her. "Not at once, Tahir Warhawk," he replied, then descended the ladder, leaving her alone with her tears and the first fragile shoot of hope. Below in the stable, Tahir stood in the shadows, listening to the muffled sounds of her weeping above. He had done many things in his life, most of them violent, some of them necessary, a few of them unforgivable, but standing in that dusty stable with a stranger's grief echoing from the rafters, he felt the first stirring of something he had thought dead. The desire to be more than what the world had made him, to protect rather than destroy. He did not know if redemption was possible for a man like him. Did not know if the blood on his hands could ever be washed clean. But as he checked his weapons and prepared for whatever came next, he made a silent promise to the woman above. She would not be hurt again while he drew breath. She would not be taken back to that platform or any place like it. Whatever it cost him, whatever enemies he made, she was under his protection now, and the Blood Rider always kept his promises. The afternoon sun had started its descent toward the western mountains when Tahir heard movement above. Soft footsteps crossing the wooden floor of the loft as Ophelia finally stirred from her exhausted rest. He had spent the hours cleaning his weapons and watching the street through gaps in the stable boards, noting the faces that passed by with too much interest in the building. Copper Bend was not done with them yet. He climbed the ladder slowly, announcing his presence with deliberate noise so she would not startle. When he reached the top, he found her standing by the window, her back to him as she watched the dusty street below. She had washed her face and hands in the basin, the water now gray with the grime she had scrubbed away. Her honey-colored hair still tangled but cleaner, pulled over one shoulder in a makeshift braid. "I brought food," Tahir said quietly, setting a cloth bundle on the small table. "Bread, dried meat, some cheese the smith's wife sent up." Not much, but it will hold us until we are clear of town. Ophelia turned slowly, her pale eyes red-rimmed from crying but clearer now. More focused than they had been on the platform, she looked at the food, then at him. Suspicion still lived in her gaze, but desperation won out. She moved to the table and sat. Her movements careful, as if her body hurt in places he could not see. Tahir remained near the ladder, giving her space. He watched as she ate with the controlled urgency of someone who had learned to hide starvation. Taking small bites, chewing thoroughly, making the food last because she did not know when the next meal would come. It told him more about her recent past than any words could. "How long?" he asked after she had eaten half the bread. "How long were you with Crow?" She paused mid-bite, her fingers tightening on the bread before she set it down carefully. 3 months, she said, her voice still soft but stronger than before. "Maybe longer. I lost count of the days after a while." Tahir nodded, not pushing for more. He could see the weight of those months in the way she held herself. The flinch she tried to hide when he moved too quickly. The constant scanning of exits as if planning escape routes had become instinct. Before Crow, she continued, surprising him with her willingness to speak. "I was with a family in Carson City, indentured to them after my father died owing debts. They were not cruel, but they were not kind either. I was just another pair of hands to work their farm." She picked up the bread again but did not eat. Just held it as if the weight of it grounded her to the present moment. The husband died of pneumonia last winter. The widow could not keep the farm. She sold my contract to a trader heading west. He sold it to another man, who lost me in a card game to Crow. "Passed around like property," Tahir said, the words coming out harder than he intended. Anger bleeding through his careful control. Ophelia looked at him sharply, hearing the fury beneath his calm exterior. "Yes," she said simply, "that is what indentured servants are. Property with papers to make it legal. I have been property since I was 16 years old." The bitterness in her voice matched the cold rage building in Tahir's chest. He understood being treated as less than human. Had lived it himself on the reservation where Apache people were counted like cattle and given less consideration. The white man's world ran on paper and laws that made cruelty respectable. "You are not property anymore," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "I do not care what papers Crow has or what contracts say you owe. You are free as soon as we ride out of here." She stared at him, searching his face for lies. For the catch that always came with promises from men. "Why?" she asked, the question raw and honest. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know me. I am nothing to you." Tahir was quiet for a long moment, considering how much truth to give her. Finally he spoke, his voice low and rough with old pain. "When I was 12, soldiers came to my village. They said we had to go to the reservation, that it was law, that we would be fed and protected there." He looked past her, seeing not the stable loft but a different place, a different time. "My mother refused to go. She said the reservation was a place where Apache went to die slowly instead of quickly. The soldiers did not care what she wanted. They took her anyway, took all of us." His hands curled into fists at his sides, the muscles in his jaw working as he forced the words out. "She died there 6 months later. Fever, the white doctor said, but I know better. She died because her spirit was broken, because being caged killed her as surely as a bullet." Ophelia's expression softened, understanding dawning in her eyes. "So when you saw me on that platform, I saw someone being treated like an object, like something that could be won in a game." Tahir finished, his voice hardening again. "I have seen enough of that to last a lifetime. I will not walk past it when I have the power to stop it." She nodded slowly, accepting his answer even if she did not fully trust it yet. Trust took time, he knew that, but at least she was listening. At least she had not given up completely. The light through the window had shifted, painting the loft in shades of amber and gold as the sun dropped lower. Tahir moved to look out at the street. His eyes scanning for trouble. What he saw made his jaw tighten. 3 men stood across from the livery, trying to look casual but failing. One was the greasy assistant from the platform. The other 2 were rough types. Hired muscle with guns on their hips and mean eyes that kept drifting toward the stable. "We have company," Tahir said, keeping his voice calm. "Crow sent men to watch us." Ophelia joined him at the window, staying back from the glass so she would not be seen. Her face paled when she recognized the assistant. "He is the one who put the chains on me every night," she said quietly, "made sure they were tight enough to leave marks." Tahir felt that cold fury settle deeper in his bones. The kind of anger that did not burn hot, but froze everything it touched until the world became simple, clear, reduced to threat and response. "Stay here," he said, moving toward the ladder. "Keep the door latched." Ophelia caught his arm, her fingers surprisingly strong as they gripped his sleeve. "What are you going to do?" "Talk to them," Tahir replied. "Make sure they understand we are leaving and they are not following." Her eyes searched his face. "She's going to kill them," she said. Not a question but a statement of fact. "Only if they are stupid enough to draw on me." He answered honestly. He had never been good at lying. Saw no point in starting now. She released his arm slowly. "Be careful," she said. The words awkward as if she was not used to saying them. As if caring about someone's safety was a luxury she had forgotten how to afford. Tahir descended the ladder and crossed the stable to where his weapons waited. He checked the Colt revolver, made sure the cylinder spun freely, then slid it back into the holster. The weight of it familiar and comforting against his hip, he did not take the rifle. Going armed for war would only escalate things before they needed escalating. The smith looked up as Tahir walked toward the front entrance, saw the set of his shoulders, the cold calculation in his eyes. "Whatever you are about to do," the smith said quietly, "do it quick and do it clean. I do not need trouble lingering around my place." "No trouble," Tahir replied, "just conversation." The smith snorted. Knew a man headed for violence when he saw one, but he said nothing more. Just returned to his work with the studied indifference of someone who had learned not to see things that might require testimony later. Tahir stepped out into the late afternoon heat, the sun hitting him like a physical weight. He did not look directly at the 3 men across the street, just moved with casual purpose toward the water trough where his horse stood drinking. The paint raised its head, ears pricked forward. Sensing the tension in its rider, the 3 men noticed him immediately. The assistant elbowed his companions, and they all turned to face the stable. Hands drifting toward weapons, but not quite touching them yet. They were gauging the situation, trying to decide if 3 against 1 was good enough odds when the one was the Apache who had made 6 impossible shots look easy. Tahir ran his hand along the horse's neck, apparently focused on checking the animal, but watching the men from the corner of his eye. He waited, patient, letting them make the first move. In his experience, guilty men always revealed themselves if you gave them enough silence to fill. The assistant finally worked up the nerve to cross the street. His 2 companions following a few steps behind, they stopped about 10 feet away, just outside the range where talking became fighting. The assistant tried to smile, but it came out as a nervous grimace. "Mr. Crow sent us," the assistant said, his voice cracking slightly on the words. "He wants to discuss the matter of the girl's contract. Seems there was some confusion at the fair, legal matters that need sorting out." "No confusion," Tahir said, not looking up from his horse. "I won the challenge, she comes with me." That was the agreement. Well, now one of the hired men spoke up. Big fellow with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. "Seems like maybe you should have read the fine print. Girl's got 7 years left on her indenture. That does not just go away because you can shoot straight." Tahir straightened slowly, turned to face them fully, his hand hanging loose at his side, but close enough to his gun that the message was clear. She is not going back, he said. His voice flat and final. You can tell Crow that. The assistant licked his lips nervously. Mr. Crow thought you might say that, he said. Which is why he authorized us to make you an offer. $500 for her contract. You walk away with money in your pocket. Everybody is happy, not for sale, Tahir replied. Getting tired of this dance, they were building up courage. Working themselves into action, he could see it in the way they kept glancing at each other. In the subtle shift of weight that preceded violence, the second hired man, lean and weasel-faced, took a step forward. You are making a mistake, Injun, he said, using the slur deliberately.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Trying to provoke a reaction, Mr. Crow has friends. Territorial Marshal owes him favors. You take that girl out of Copper Bend, and you will have law on your tail along with us. Then I guess you better be ready to follow a long way, Tahir said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that made smart men nervous. The weasel-faced man's hand moved toward his gun, not drawing but resting on the grip in a mirror of Tahir's own stance. You talk big for a man alone, Tahir smiled, a cold expression that held no humor. You assume I am alone, he said. You assume wrong. It was a bluff, but a good one. The three men hesitated, eyes darting to the shadows around the stable, to the windows above, suddenly uncertain about what they might be walking into. From the stable entrance, the smith's voice called out, flat and bored. Told you boys yesterday, I do not allow fighting near my forge. Scares the horses, you got business with this man. Take it out of town. The authority in the smith's voice gave the hired men an excuse to back down without losing too much face. The big one with the scarred eyebrow nodded slowly. We will tell Mr. Crow you are not interested in his generous offer, he said, but do not say we did not warn you. They backed away, keeping their eyes on Tahir until they reached the far side of the street, then turned and walked toward the center of town where Crow would be waiting for their report. The assistant glanced back once, his face twisted with frustrated rage. They would be back, Tahir knew. Probably tonight with more men and less talk. He returned to the stable to find the smith watching him. You have maybe 2 hours before Crow works himself into doing something stupid, the smith said. He is mean, but he is also greedy. That girl represents money to him. He will not let her go easy, I know, Tahir replied. Which is why we leave before dark, Smith nodded, pulled something from his apron pocket and held it out. Dried venison and hardtack, enough for a few days if you are careful. My wife packed it while you were dealing with those fools. Tahir took the offered supplies. Surprised by the continued kindness, why are you helping us? The smith shrugged. Had a daughter once. She got taken by Comanche raiders 10 years back. Never saw her again. He looked away, his weathered face hard with old grief. I see a girl in chains. I remember my Sarah. Figure if someone had helped her, maybe she would have come home. Tahir gripped the man's shoulder briefly, a gesture of respect and gratitude. The smith nodded once, then returned to his forge. The conversation over, back in the loft, Ophelia had been watching from the window, her face pale but determined. I saw them leave, she said as Tahir climbed up. They will come back with more men. Yes, Tahir agreed, which is why we ride now. Can you handle a horse? I grew up on a farm, she replied. I can ride well enough if the horse is not wild. His paint is gentle with people he likes, Tahir said. He will carry us both until we are clear of town. Then we can get you a mount of your own. Ophelia looked down at her torn dress, at the thin shoes that would not last a day of hard riding. I am not exactly dressed for travel. Tahir pulled a bundle from his saddlebag, clothes he had been saving for trade. A pair of canvas pants, a work shirt, a leather vest. They will be too big, but you can cinch them tight, better than writing in skirts. She took the clothes, held them against herself. Judging the fit, where do I change? Right here, Tahir said. I will wait below. Call when you are ready. He descended the ladder and began preparing the horse. Double-checking the saddle, securing their supplies. Making sure everything was balanced for the weight of 2 riders. Above him he could hear Ophelia moving around. The rustle of fabric as she changed clothes, when she called down that she was ready. He climbed back up to find her transformed. The pants were indeed too large. Held up by a length of rope she had fashioned into a belt. The shirt hung loose, but she had rolled the sleeves to her elbows. The vest helped disguise how much fabric she was drowning in. She had braided her hair tightly and tucked it up under a hat she had found somewhere. Where did you get that? Tahir asked, pointing at the battered felt hat. It was hanging on a peg, she said. Figured whoever left it would not mind if I borrowed it for a while. She looked different dressed this way, less fragile, more capable. The soft cultured lady from the platform, replaced by someone who could survive in hard country. It was a good look for her, practical and unremarkable. They would draw less attention on the trail, with her dressed like a young ranch hand instead of a woman in chains. We stay off the main roads, Tahir said. Laying out the plan as they descended to the stable, head northwest into the mountains. I know places where we can camp without being seen. Old Apache trails that white men have forgotten or never learned. Ophelia listened carefully, nodding as she committed his words to memory. How long until we are safe? Depends on how far Crow is willing to chase us, Tahir replied honestly. And whether he can convince the marshal to make it official. But once we reach the high country, tracking becomes harder. We will have the advantage there. They led the paint out through the back of the stable, avoiding the main street where curious eyes might see them leaving. The smith watched them go with a slight nod, asking no questions, offering no farewell. Just returning to his work as if they had never been there. Tahir mounted first, then reached down to help Ophelia up. She hesitated for just a moment before taking his hand. Letting him pull her up behind him, she settled onto the horse's rump, her arms coming around his waist tentatively. Not quite trusting the contact, but understanding the necessity. Hold tight, Tahir said. We will be moving fast once we clear town. Her arms tightened around him. He felt her tension through the grip. The rigid control she maintained even now. Ready to fight or flee at the first sign of betrayal. It would take time for her to learn that not all touch meant harm. That protection could be real instead of a prelude to possession. They rode out as the sun touched the western peaks. Painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Copper Bend fell away behind them. A collection of shabby buildings growing smaller with each stride of the horse. Somewhere in that town Crow was gathering his men, planning his pursuit. Calculating how much the recapture would cost, versus how much profit the girl represented. But for now they were ahead of him, riding into the gathering twilight with the desert stretching vast and open before them. Tahir guided the horse toward the distant mountains. Toward the hidden places where Apache had survived for generations. Toward whatever future waited beyond the next ridge. Behind him Ophelia's grip slowly relaxed as the miles passed. Her body learning to move with the horse's rhythm. Her breathing evening out as exhaustion caught up with adrenaline. She rested her forehead against his shoulder blade. Not from affection, but from simple fatigue. And Tahir found himself hyper-aware of her presence. Of the trust implied by that small gesture, even if she did not recognize it yet. They rode until full dark, until the stars emerged in breathtaking clarity above them. Until the last traces of Copper Bend had been swallowed by distance and darkness. Only then did Tahir allow himself to believe they had made it through the first barrier. But he knew from experience that first barriers were often the easiest. The real test would come in the days ahead when Crow's men picked up their trail. When the marshal got involved if greed won out over jurisdiction. When the hard questions had to be answered about where they were going and what came next. For now, though, in this moment of suspended peace between dangers, they had something neither had possessed in a long time. They had freedom, however temporary, however fragile. And they had each other, two damaged souls riding into an uncertain future with nothing but hope and determination to sustain them. The blood rider and the servant girl, the Apache warrior and the indentured woman. The hunter and the hunted now running together towards something that might be safety or might be just another kind of trap. Neither knowing which, both willing to take the chance because the alternative was unthinkable. And somewhere in the darkness behind them, in the town they had escaped, men were saddling horses and loading weapons, preparing to teach them that freedom was not something people like them were allowed to claim. Dawn broke cold and gray over the mountain trail where Tahir had finally stopped to make camp. They had ridden through most of the night, putting miles between themselves and Copper Bend before exhaustion forced them to rest. Ophelia had fallen asleep against his back during the last hours, her arms still locked around his waist even in unconsciousness. When he had lifted her down from the horse, she barely stirred. Collapsing onto the bedroll, he spread for her with the boneless surrender of complete exhaustion. Now he sat with his back against a boulder, watching the eastern sky lighten while his body screamed for sleep he could not afford. Every sound in the pre-dawn darkness made his hand drift toward his revolver. Every shift of wind brought his head up alert for the smell of horses or the sound of pursuit. They were not safe yet, would not be safe for days if Crow proved as persistent as Tahir suspected. The camp was tucked into a narrow canyon where ancient water had carved channels through red rock. A small spring bubbled from a crack in the stone, providing fresh water, and the sound helped mask other noises that might give away their position. Tahir had chosen this place deliberately. It offered cover, water, and a clear view of anyone approaching from below, while the steep walls made attack from above nearly impossible. His paint horse stood hobbled nearby, cropping at the sparse grass that grew near the spring. The animal had earned its rest after carrying double weight through rough country. Tahir would need to find Ophelia a mount soon. Pushing one horse too hard would leave them both on foot if something went wrong. Movement from the bedroll drew his attention. Ophelia stirred, her face creasing with confusion as consciousness returned and she found herself in an unfamiliar place. She sat up quickly, too quickly, her hand going to her chest as if checking for chains that were no longer there. The panic in her eyes cleared when she saw Tahir watching her from across the small camp. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep and the dust they had ridden through. "About 15 miles northwest of Copper Bend," Tahir replied. "High country. Harder to track, harder to follow." She looked around the canyon, taking in the red rock walls and the narrow sky visible above. "Did anyone follow us?" "Not yet," he said, "but they will." Crow is not the type to give up easy. Men like him see lost property as lost money. That makes them persistent. Ophelia stood slowly, working stiffness from muscles unaccustomed to long hours on horseback. She moved to the spring and knelt, cupping water in her hands to drink, then splashing her face with the cold liquid. When she looked back at Tahir, her expression had shifted from sleep-fogged confusion to sharp awareness. "You did not sleep at all," she observed, watching him with those pale eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted to reveal. "Someone needs to keep watch," Tahir replied. "I will rest when we have more distance." She studied him for a long moment, then moved to where he sat and lowered herself to the ground nearby. Not touching but close enough to speak quietly. "You cannot ride and watch forever," she said. "Eventually exhaustion will kill you as surely as Crow's men." "I have gone longer without sleep," Tahir said. But even as the words left his mouth, he felt the weight of weariness pressing down on him. She was right, of course. He could not maintain this pace indefinitely. But the alternative meant trusting her to watch while he slept. Trusting someone he barely knew with both their lives. "Teach me what to watch for," Ophelia said as if reading his thoughts. "I can keep guard for a few hours while you rest." I am not skilled with weapons, but I can wake you if I see or hear anything wrong. Tahir wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain control. But he recognized the foolishness in that impulse. Pride had killed more men than caution ever saved. He nodded slowly and began explaining what to listen for. The sound of shod hooves on rock, the jingle of tack. The way birds went quiet when humans approached. How to judge distance by echoes in the canyon. She listened with the intense focus of someone whose survival depended on learning quickly. Asking questions when she did not understand. Repeating back his instructions to make sure she had them right. Watching her concentrate on his words, Tahir felt a flicker of respect for her resilience. Lesser people would have collapsed into helplessness after what she had endured. But she was adapting, learning, refusing to be a burden. "Wake me if anything feels wrong," Tahir said finally. "Not just looks wrong or sounds wrong. If your gut tells you something is off, trust that feeling," she nodded. Settling herself where she could see the approach from below while still being sheltered by the rocks. Tahir moved to the bedroll she had vacated, still warm from her body heat. He lay down with his revolver in his hand and let his eyes close. Sleep took him almost instantly. Dragging him down into darkness, he dreamed of his mother. Of her face the last time he saw her alive, gaunt with reservation hunger but still proud. Still Apache despite everything the whites had done to break her spirit. In the dream she spoke to him in their language, words he had not heard in years. She told him that protecting the weak was the highest calling of a warrior. That strength without compassion was just another form of cruelty. The dream shifted and his mother's face became Ophelia's. Those pale eyes looking at him with an expression he could not read. Hope maybe, or fear, or something more complicated that he did not have words for. He reached for her in the dream, but she faded like smoke, leaving him alone in darkness. He woke to find Ophelia's hand on his shoulder, shaking him gently. Her face close to his as she whispered urgently. "Riders," she said. "I heard them about 10 minutes ago. They stopped down canyon. Sounds like they are searching." Tahir came fully awake instantly. Years of living on the edge had trained him to go from sleep to readiness without the fog that slowed other men. He sat up and listened, filtering through the natural sounds of morning until he caught what had alerted her. The faint clink of metal on metal. The low murmur of voices carrying on the wind. "How many?" he asked quietly. "At least 3, maybe more," Ophelia replied. "I could not tell for certain." Tahir moved to where he could see down the canyon without exposing himself. Sure enough, 3 riders had stopped about a quarter-mile below. Studying the ground, looking for tracks, one of them dismounted and knelt. Examining something Tahir could not see from this distance. "They found our trail," he said. "It was only a matter of time. We need to move." They packed quickly, efficiently, no wasted motion, as they gathered their few supplies and prepared the horse. Tahir checked his weapons while Ophelia rolled the bedding, both of them working in tense silence. Aware that every minute spent in camp was a minute the pursuers drew closer. "Can we outrun them?" Ophelia asked as Tahir helped her mount. "Not on one horse carrying double," he replied, climbing up behind her. "But we do not need to outrun them. We just need to reach ground where horses cannot follow. Then we go on foot and they have to choose between chasing us into rough country or turning back." He guided the paint up a narrow trail that switchbacked along the canyon wall. The path was barely wide enough for the horse, loose rocks skittering down with each step. Below them, the riders had spotted their movement and were spurring forward. Shouts echoing off the stone walls, the paint climbed steadily, its hooves finding purchase on the treacherous slope. Tahir leaned forward, shifting his weight to help the animal balance. Behind him, Ophelia gripped his waist tightly. Her face pressed against his shoulder as they climbed higher into terrain that grew increasingly hostile. A gunshot cracked from below, the bullet striking rock 10 feet to their left and whining off into space. The range was too great for accuracy, but it sent a clear message. Crow's men were not interested in negotiation. They wanted the girl back and would kill to get her. Tahir urged the horse faster, pushing it harder than he liked, but knowing they had no choice. Another shot rang out, closer this time, and he felt the paint flinch as rock chips stung its legs. The animal wanted to bolt, but Tahir held it steady. If it panicked on this narrow trail, they would all go over the edge. The trail peaked and dropped into a high valley, a hidden basin surrounded by steep cliffs where spring runoff had created a small meadow of green grass. Tahir pushed the paint across the meadow toward the far side, where he knew another trail led higher into the mountains. Behind them, the riders had reached the valley entrance and were spreading out to cut off escape routes. 4 men, not 3, Tahir counted quickly. The big one with the scarred eyebrow from yesterday, the weasel-faced one, and 2 others he did not recognize. All armed, all determined. He could see it in the way they moved. This was not about money anymore. This was about pride. About not letting an Apache make fools of them. Tahir reached the far trail and urged the paint up. But the animal was faltering now, exhausted from the long night and the hard climb. Foam flecked its neck and its breathing came in labored gasps. They were not going to make it up the next ridge. Not before the riders closed the distance. He pulled up behind a cluster of boulders that offered cover and dismounted. Helping Ophelia down quickly, she saw the grim set of his jaw and understood without words. "We make a stand here," she said, "not a question." "No choice," Tahir replied, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "They are too close, and the horse is spent, but this position is defensible. They cannot rush us without exposing themselves." He positioned Ophelia behind the largest boulder. Handed her his knife. "If anyone gets past me, you use that. Aim for the belly or throat. Do not hesitate." She took the knife with steady hands. Her fear controlled, channeled into focus. "I will not go back to Crow," she said quietly. "I would rather die here." "It will not come to that," Tahir promised. Though he could not be certain. 4 against 1 were hard odds even with good position and better weapons. The riders had dismounted and were approaching on foot. Using the scattered boulders for cover, they had learned caution from watching him shoot. Knew he could drop them at range if they gave him a clear target. The scarred man called out, his voice carrying across the meadow. "You are cornered, Injun. No way out from here. Give us the girl and you can ride away." "We have no quarrel with you." Tahir did not respond. He was watching their movement, judging distances, calculating angles. 3 of them were spreading out to flank while the 4th stayed in the center. Classic pincer formation. They had done this before. "The girl belongs to Mr. Crow." The voice continued, "Taking her is theft. That makes you a criminal. Territorial law is on our side. You are just making this harder than it needs to be." Still Tahir said nothing. Silence was a weapon too. Let them talk. Let them wonder why he was not afraid. Doubt bred mistakes and he needed them to make mistakes. Movement to the left caught his eye. The weasel-faced man trying to work around the flank. Tahir tracked him with the rifle, waiting until he had to cross a gap between boulders. The shot rang out and the man went down, clutching his leg and screaming. Not a kill shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. The other 3 froze. Reassessing, 1 shot, 1 hit, just like at the fair. They were remembering now why they should be afraid. "That was your warning," Tahir called out, his voice carrying cold certainty. "Next one goes between the eyes. Leave now while you still can." The scarred man cursed, furious. "You shot Kemper. You are dead for that. He was dead the moment he drew pay to hunt me." Tahir replied, "You want to join him, keep coming." For a long moment nothing moved. The standoff stretched taut as wire. Then one of the men Tahir did not recognize stood up. "Hands raised, I am out," he said loudly. "This is not worth dying over." He walked backward slowly, hands still raised, until he reached his horse, then mounted and rode away without looking back. Smart man, Tahir thought, knew when to fold. That left 3, 1 wounded. 2 still in the fight. Better odds but not good ones. Tahir watched for the next move, knowing it would come soon. Cornered men got desperate, and desperate men took stupid risks. The scarred man made his play, rushing forward while the third man laid down covering fire. Bullets struck all around Tahir's position. Forcing him down, he rolled left and came up shooting. His first shot missed. The second caught the scarred man in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third man broke cover to help his companion, and Tahir's rifle cracked again. The man dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The scarred man was on the ground, bleeding from his shoulder. His gun fallen from nerveless fingers. The weasel-faced Kemper still writhed in pain from his leg wound. The third man was not moving at all. Tahir watched them for a moment, rifle trained. Making sure the fight was truly over, Ophelia emerged from behind the boulder. Still gripping the knife, her knuckles white. She looked at the fallen men with an expression Tahir could not read. Not satisfaction, not horror, something in between. Is it over? She asked. For now, Tahir replied. He walked forward carefully, kicked the scarred man's gun away. The man looked up at him with pain-filled eyes. You are a dead man, the scarred man gasped. Crow will never stop, never. Then he will die disappointed, Tahir said flatly. Tell him that if you live long enough to get back to town. Tell him the girl is under my protection, and anyone who comes after her answers to me. He moved to check the other men. The third man was dead, clean headshot. Kemper would live if they got him to a doctor. The scarred man would too, though he would lose use of that arm. Tahir felt no guilt about it. They had come hunting. They had found a hunter. He gathered their weapons, broke them apart, and scattered the pieces. No point in leaving them armed for round 2. Then he returned to where Ophelia waited. His paint stood nearby, its breathing slowly returning to normal. We need to move, Tahir said. That gunfire will carry. If there are more men nearby, they will come to investigate. Ophelia nodded. She had not put down the knife yet. Held it like a talisman against evil. Tahir gently took it from her fingers and slid it back into its sheath. You did well, he said quietly. Staying calm. Staying ready, that took courage. I was terrified, she admitted. Every second I thought they would get past you. That I would have to use that knife, that everything would end here. But you stayed anyway, Tahir replied. That is what courage is. Doing what must be done despite the fear. They mounted up. The paint refreshed enough to carry them further as they rode away from the valley. From the blood and the bodies and the echoes of gunfire. Ophelia spoke again, her voice thoughtful. You could have killed them all. She said, you had the skill, you chose not to. Why? Because killing should not be easy, Tahir replied. The day it becomes easy is the day you stop being human and become something else. Something I do not want to be. She was quiet for a while, processing his words. Then she said, you are not what I expected when I saw you at the fair. I thought you were just another violent man. Someone who solved problems with bullets. I am that too, Tahir admitted. I will not lie about what I have done or what I am capable of doing. But I choose when and why I use violence. That choice is what separates warriors from killers. They rode higher into the mountains as the sun climbed toward noon, leaving the valley and its violence behind. But Tahir knew the fight was far from over. Wounded men would return to Copper Bend with stories. Crow would be more determined than ever. More men would come, better armed, better prepared. But for now, in this moment, they had survived, they had won this round. And they were together, two people who had started as strangers, now bound by shared danger and the growing understanding that whatever came next, they would face it side by side, the blood rider and his unexpected companion, riding deeper into the wild places where civilization's rules held no power. where the only law was survival and the only judge was the harsh land itself. And behind them, in the valley they had escaped, the wounded men began the long, painful journey back to town, carrying news that would turn the hunt for Ophelia Bancroft from a simple retrieval into something far more dangerous. A matter of revenge. 3 days of hard travel had brought them deep into territory that most white men avoided. The high peaks where Apache had hunted for generations before the reservation boundaries carved up the land like a butchered carcass. Tahir guided them through passages he had learned as a boy, following game trails that became paths that became nothing but memory and instinct. Always climbing, always moving toward places where pursuit became impossible. They had found Ophelia, a horse, on the second day. A sturdy buckskin mare left behind at an abandoned line shack.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
Probably by prospectors who had given up their claims and headed back to easier country. The animal was half wild from neglect, but Ophelia had a way with horses that surprised Tahir. She spent hours talking softly to the mare, offering handfuls of grass, moving with patient gentleness until the buckskin accepted her touch, accepted the saddle, accepted the bit. Now she rode beside him instead of behind, her posture growing more confident with each mile. The borrowed men's clothing had become comfortable on her, the too large pants and shirt transforming her from delicate servant to capable trail companion. Her face had lost some of its hollow gauntness. 3 days of regular meals and mountain air, bringing color back to her cheeks. They had not spoken much during the travel, both conserving energy for the climb, both listening constantly for sounds of pursuit that never came. Crow's men had either given up or were taking time to regroup. Either way, the silence felt dangerous, like the stillness before a storm. As the sun began its afternoon descent, Tahir led them to a box canyon he remembered from his youth, a hidden place where a year-round stream fed a small grove of aspen and pine. The entrance was narrow enough to defend easily, the walls too steep to climb, and a clear pool provided fresh water and the chance to wash away days of trail dust. "We camp here tonight," Tahir said, dismounting near the stream. "Tomorrow we reach my cabin. Another day beyond that to my people's old hunting grounds. If we make it that far without trouble, we should be clear." Ophelia slid from her horse with only a slight wince, her body adapting to the demands of long riding. She led the buckskin to water and stood watching it drink, her hand absently stroking its neck. When she looked back at Tahir, her expression was thoughtful. "Your cabin," she said. "You mentioned it before, but never said where or what kind of place it is." "Small," Tahir replied. "One room, built into the rock so it stays cool in summer and holds heat in winter. I use it when I am working this territory, checking trap lines, hunting. Sometimes just getting away from people." "Will there be supplies there?" she asked. "Things we might need." "Some," Tahir said. "Ammunition, dried goods, blankets. I keep it stocked for emergencies. We can rest there a few days. Let the horses recover. Decide what comes next." "What comes next?" Ophelia repeated, as if the phrase held weight she was only beginning to understand. She moved away from the horses and sat on a flat rock near the stream, her hands folded in her lap. "I have been so focused on escaping, on surviving each day, that I have not let myself think about what happens when we stop running." Tahir began unsaddling the horses, his movements automatic while his mind worked through the implications of her words. He had been avoiding the same question, focusing on the immediate threats. But eventually the running had to end. Eventually they had to face the reality of what they were building between them. "You have choices now," he said carefully, "once we reach safe ground. Once Crow gives up or we put enough distance that he cannot find us. You can go wherever you want. I know people who run stations on the underground routes. They help runaways get to California or north to Oregon Territory. New identities, new starts. And you, Ophelia asked, what will you do? Tahir set the saddle down and straightened, meeting her eyes across the small clearing. I go back to what I was doing before Copper Bend. Living alone, taking work when I need money. Avoiding towns and trouble. It is not much of a life, but it is mine. Sounds lonely, she observed quietly. It is, Tahir admitted. But loneliness is safer than connection. You cannot lose what you never let yourself have. Ophelia was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and walked toward him, stopping close enough that he could see the silver flecks in her blue-gray eyes. I spent 3 years as property, she said. 3 years where every day someone else decided what I did. Where I went, who I served. I dreamed of freedom so hard it hurt. Imagined it would feel like flying. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But freedom is just another kind of loneliness if you have no one to share it with. These last few days, running for our lives. Sleeping on hard ground, never knowing if we would see another sunrise. I have felt more alive than in all those years of servitude. Tahir felt something shift in his chest, a cracking of the ice he had built around his heart. What are you saying? I am saying that when you ask what comes next, maybe the answer is not about running away from something, but running towards something. She replied, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her words. Maybe it is about two people who have both been alone too long, deciding they do not have to be alone anymore. Before Tahir could respond, before he could process the invitation in her words, a sound cut through the canyon, distant but unmistakable. The baying of hounds on a scent. They both froze, every nerve suddenly alert. Tahir moved to the canyon entrance and listened. The sound came again, closer now, multiple dogs. And behind them, the muted thunder of horses at gallop. How did they find us? Ophelia whispered. Her face gone pale. Tracking dogs, Tahir said grimly. Crow must have brought in a professional hunter. Someone who knows how to follow a trail even through hard country. His mind raced through options. The canyon offered defense, but also trapped them. If men came in both ends, they would be caught. But the walls were too steep to climb with the horses. And abandoning the animals meant traveling on foot through mountains that would kill them as surely as bullets. We cannot stay here, Tahir decided. Grabbing his saddle, we pushed through to the far end. There is a narrow passage that leads to a ridge. Dogs cannot follow that trail. What about the horses? Ophelia asked. Already moving to saddle her buckskin, we take them as far as we can. Then turn them loose and go on foot if we have to. Tahir replied. He worked quickly, his hands sure despite the urgency. Priority is keeping you away from Crow. Everything else is secondary. They mounted and pushed deeper into the canyon, following the stream toward the back wall where Tahir remembered the passage. The baying grew louder behind them, echoing off stone walls, making it impossible to judge exactly how close the pursuit had come. The passage was where Tahir remembered. A crack in the rock face barely wide enough for a horse to squeeze through sideways. He went first, coaxing his paint into the narrow space. The animal balked but trusted him enough to follow. Rocks scraped its sides and the saddle caught once, forcing Tahir to dismount and lead it through on foot. Ophelia followed with the buckskin, the mare more nervous than the paint, dancing sideways and rolling its eyes. Come on, girl, Ophelia murmured. I know it is scary, but we have to go through. Please, the buckskin finally committed. Pushing through the passage with Ophelia walking beside it, talking constantly in that calm voice that somehow kept the animal from panicking. When they emerged on the other side, they found themselves on a narrow ledge, with a sheer drop on one side and vertical rock on the other. The trail ahead was worse than Tahir remembered. Time and weather had eroded parts of it, leaving gaps where rock had fallen away. In places it was barely 2 feet wide. Not enough room for a horse to turn around if something went wrong. Can they make it? Ophelia asked, staring at the treacherous path. They have to, Tahir replied. Because we cannot go back. He led his paint forward onto the ledge. The animal's hooves clicking on stone, every step measured and careful. Tahir kept his weight centered, moving slowly, letting the horse feel its way. One wrong step and they would both plunge hundreds of feet to the rocks below. Behind him Ophelia followed, her knuckles white as she gripped the buckskin's reins. She did not look down at the drop, keeping her eyes fixed on Tahir's back, focusing on the next step, then the next, refusing to think about the void beside them. They were halfway across when the hounds burst through the passage behind them. 3 big red-boned coonhounds bred for tracking. They skidded to a stop at the edge of the ledge, baying furiously but smart enough not to follow onto the narrow trail. Behind them came their handler, a lean, weathered man with cold eyes and a rifle slung across his back. "End of the line," the hunter called out, his voice carrying across the gap. "Nowhere left to run. Those horses cannot make that trail, and you sure as hell cannot go back." Tahir twisted in his saddle to look back, his hand on his revolver. The range was long, but not impossible. "Do not even think about it," the hunter said. "You shoot me and my boys will be honor-bound to see this through. They are waiting just outside the canyon with a territorial marshal and papers that say the girl is stolen property. Legal recovery, you cannot fight law and win." "Watch me," Tahir replied, his voice hard as the stone around them. The hunter shrugged. "Have it your way, but know this. Crow has put up $1,000 bounty on you both, dead or alive. That kind of money brings out every hard case and bounty killer in 3 territories. You will never stop running, never be safe. People you meet will betray you for a share of that reward." "Then I guess we keep running," Tahir said. "And anyone who tries to collect answers to me." He turned back to the trail and urged his paint forward. The horse responded, trusting despite fear. They continued along the ledge while behind them the hunter watched with something that might have been respect in his cold eyes. The trail widened eventually, opening onto a high mesa where wind-twisted pine trees offered some cover. Tahir pushed hard across the open ground, knowing they had maybe an hour before the hunter found another way around. Maybe less if he knew this country. As they rode, Ophelia came up beside him, her face set with determination. $1,000, she said. "That is more money than most men see in 5 years. People will kill for that." "I know," Tahir replied. "So what do we do?" she asked. "How do we survive when everyone is hunting us?" Tahir had been thinking about that question since the hunter spoke the words. The answer was not one he liked, but it was the only one that made sense. "We disappear," he said. "Truly disappear. Not just hide in the mountains, but become ghosts. New names, new lives, go somewhere neither of us has been before." "Could we do that?" Ophelia asked. "Just walk away from everything?" "You already did when you left that platform," Tahir pointed out. "I did it years ago when I left the reservation. We have both lost everything once, we can do it again." "But this time we would not be alone," she said. And there was hope in her voice despite the danger. "No," Tahir agreed. "This time we would not be alone." They rode until dark, pushing the horses to their limit. When they finally stopped, both animals were spent, sides heaving, heads hanging low. Tahir found a sheltered spot among boulders, and they made a cold camp. No fire to give away their position, just dried meat and water from their canteens. Ophelia sat close to him as the stars emerged overhead, close enough that their shoulders touched. The contact no longer making her flinch. "I never thanked you properly," she said after a long silence, "for what you did at the fair. For choosing to help me when you had no reason to. You do not need to thank me." Tahir replied, "Yes, I do," she insisted. "You changed my life that day, gave me back something I thought was lost forever. Myself, the person I was before the world broke me. You gave me that back." Tahir looked at her in the starlight, seeing not the frightened servant from the platform, but the strong woman she had become over these hard days. Maybe we gave each other something, he said quietly. I was dead inside before Copper Bend. Just going through motions, surviving but not living. You reminded me what it feels like to care about someone besides myself. Ophelia turned to face him fully. Her eyes searching his in the darkness. Is that what this is? She asked. Caring about each other. Tahir knew the safe answer. Knew he should keep distance, keep barriers, but the words that came out were honest, even if they were dangerous. Yes, he said, I care about you more than I should. More than is wise given our circumstances. She reached up and touched his face. Her palm soft against the hard angles of his jaw. Then I am glad for unwise things, she whispered. Because wise things never made me feel the way I feel when I look at you. He caught her hand in his, held it there against his skin. Ophelia. We are running for our lives, hunted by professionals. With a price on our heads that will bring every killer in the territory. This is not the time for what? She interrupted. For feeling something real. For admitting that somewhere between that fairground and this moment, we became more than protector and protected. We became partners. She leaned closer, her breath warm against his lips. If we die tomorrow, I want to know I was brave enough to say that I am falling in love with you, Tahir Warhawk. And I think you feel the same way about me. Tahir closed his eyes. Feeling the truth of her words settle into him like an arrow finding its mark. When he opened them again, he saw everything he had lost reflected in her face. Hope, connection, the possibility of something beyond survival. I do, he admitted, I feel the same. Have been fighting it because I know how dangerous it is to love someone when death follows this close. Then we fight together, Ophelia said firmly, and we love together. And if death comes we face it knowing we were not alone. He kissed her then, gently at first. Then with all the pent-up longing and fear and desperate hope that had been building between them since the moment their eyes met at the fair, she kissed him back with equal intensity. Her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. We are probably going to die, she whispered. But I have never felt more alive. We are not going to die, Tahir promised. I will not let that happen. I lost everyone I loved once. I will not lose you too. They held each other as the night deepened around them. Two souls who had found each other in the worst circumstances imaginable. Now bound together by something stronger than fear. Stronger than the pursuit that dogged their trail, and somewhere in the darkness behind them. The hunter and his dogs pressed forward, patient and relentless. While in Copper Bend, Virgil Crow sat in his office counting the money he would make when his property was returned. But neither man understood what they were chasing, what they were up against. They saw a runaway servant and the Apache who stole her. They did not see two warriors who had finally found something worth fighting for. And that miscalculation would cost them everything. The cabin appeared through morning mist like something from a half-remembered dream. Built into a rock overhang so naturally that it seemed to have grown there rather than been constructed by human hands. Rough-hewn logs sealed with mud and moss, a stone chimney rising from one side. A door made of split pine weathered silver by mountain winters. Tahir had led them through the final miles before dawn, navigating by starlight and memory. Determined to reach shelter before the hunter picked up their trail again. Ophelia slid from her exhausted buckskin and stood staring at the structure. Her face showing relief mixed with the bone-deep weariness of 5 days running. Is it safe? She asked, her voice hoarse from breathing cold mountain air. As safe as anywhere can be, Tahir replied. Dismounting and leading both horses to a lean-to shelter built against the rock face. No one knows about this place except me. I built it alone, told no one, not even my own people. He unsaddled the animals quickly, his movements efficient despite his own exhaustion. They had pushed hard through the night, riding trails that were barely visible even in daylight. The horses had given everything they had. Now they stood with heads low, flanks heaving. Too tired even to drink from the stream that ran beside the cabin. Inside the cabin was exactly as Tahir had left it 6 months ago. One room perhaps 15 feet square, a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. A raised sleeping platform built along another. Shelves holding supplies, a table and 2 chairs. Everything simple and functional. Dust covered the surfaces, but otherwise nothing had been disturbed. Ophelia moved to the fireplace and ran her hand along the mantel, feeling the solid reality of walls and roof after so many nights sleeping under stars. "This is yours," she said softly, "really yours. Not rented or borrowed or owned by someone who could take it away." Tahir was lighting a fire, coaxing flame from tinder with practiced ease. "It is mine," he agreed, "bought with money I earned hunting. Built with my own hands. No white man's law can touch it, because it does not exist on any map or deed." The fire caught and spread, filling the small space with warmth and flickering light. Ophelia sank into one of the chairs, her body finally allowing itself to feel the accumulated exhaustion of their flight. She watched Tahir move around the cabin, checking supplies, preparing food. His movements careful and deliberate, even in his own space. "When did you build this?" she asked, "and why here?" "So far from everything, 2 years ago," Tahir replied. "Setting a pot of water to boil for coffee. I needed a place that was mine. Somewhere I could come when the world got too heavy. The mountains have always felt more like home than the reservation ever did." He pulled dried venison and hardtack from the supplies. Not much of a meal, but it would fill their empty bellies. As he worked, he continued talking, his voice low and reflective. "After my mother died, I spent years just drifting, taking work where I could find it. Mostly hunting bounties or guiding prospectors. Making enough money to drink away the anger and pain." "What changed?" Ophelia asked, watching him with those pale eyes that seemed to see through his carefully maintained walls. Tahir was quiet for a moment, then he sat across from her, his hands wrapped around a tin cup of steaming coffee. "I tracked a man to Mexico, 3 weeks of following cold trails. When I finally caught up to him, he was dying of snakebite, delirious with fever. He looked at me and said he was glad someone would witness his death. That dying alone was the worst thing he could imagine." He took a slow sip of coffee, buying time before continuing. "I stayed with him until the end, listened to him talk about his regrets, his failures, the people he had hurt. When he finally stopped breathing, I realized I was looking at my own future. Dying alone in some forgotten place, with nothing but regrets for company." "So you built this cabin," Ophelia said, understanding dawning in her expression. "You were trying to build something permanent. Something that would outlast you." "Yes," Tahir admitted, "foolish maybe. But I needed to prove to myself that I could create, instead of just destroy. That the Blood Rider could be more than a ghost leaving corpses in his wake." Ophelia reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers warm against his skin. "It is not foolish," she said firmly. "It is human, wanting to matter. Wanting to leave something behind. We all want that, even when the world tries to convince us we do not deserve it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and eating the simple food. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and revealing the full beauty of the hidden valley where the cabin stood. Pine forests stretched in every direction, broken by meadows where elk would graze. A small lake visible in the distance caught the morning light like a mirror. Tahir broke the silence first. "We can stay here a few days," he said. "Let the horses recover. Gather supplies, but we cannot stay forever. That hunter will not give up. And the bounty means others will come." "I know," Ophelia replied. "But maybe we can use this time to make a real plan. Figure out where we go from here." You mentioned California or Oregon territory. Places where we could disappear. Before Tahir could respond, a sound froze them both. The sharp crack of a branch breaking under weight. Too loud to be an animal, too deliberate to be accident. Someone was approaching the cabin. Tahir moved instantly, blowing out the lamp and motioning Ophelia toward the back corner where shadows were deepest. He grabbed his rifle and positioned himself beside the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. What he saw made his blood run cold, not the hunter and his dogs. Not Crow's hired guns, but something worse. A full dozen men spread out in a loose perimeter around the cabin. Some wore badges that caught the sunlight. Territorial marshals with legal authority. Others were clearly hired muscle. And at the center of the group stood Virgil Crow himself, his face twisted with triumph. A voice called out, loud and official, "This is Deputy Marshal Hendricks. We have a warrant for the return of one Ophelia Bancroft, indentured servant. Legal property of Virgil Crow under territorial contract law. We also have a warrant for the arrest of Tahir Warhawk on charges of theft, kidnapping, and assault." Tahir glanced back at Ophelia, saw the fear in her eyes, but also determination. She had come too far to give up now. He turned back to the window and called out, "The woman is not property. She is free. Your warrants mean nothing here." The marshal's voice came again, harder this time. "You are surrounded, outnumbered, and out of legal options. Send the girl out and surrender yourself. Nobody else has to die today." Tahir's mind raced through possibilities. The cabin was defensible, but they were trapped. Fighting would mean bloodshed, and he was not sure he could win against 12 men. Some of them lawmen, but surrendering meant Ophelia going back to chains and himself facing a rope. Ophelia moved beside him, her hand finding his. "Whatever you decide." She whispered, "We do it together. I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me." Before Tahir could respond, a new voice cut through the tense standoff. Strong and commanding, speaking in Apache, "Stand down, nephew. This fight is not one you can win alone." Tahir's head snapped toward the voice, shock and disbelief warring in his expression. Emerging from the trees on the far side of the clearing came a group of Apache warriors. 8 men on horseback, armed and painted for war. At their head rode a man Tahir recognized instantly. Chief Naich, his mother's brother, the uncle he had not seen in 5 years. The marshals shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons. But the Apache warriors spread out, positioning themselves between the law and the cabin. The message was clear: to reach Tahir and Ophelia, they would have to go through the war party. "What is happening?" Ophelia whispered. "Who are they?" "My people," Tahir replied, his voice thick with emotion he could not quite name. "Or what is left of them. I do not understand why they are here." Chief Naich raised his hand in a gesture of peace, then spoke again, this time in English so all could hear. "The woman and my nephew under the protection of the Apache Nation. They will not be taken by white law today." Marshal Hendricks stepped forward, his face red with frustration. "You have no authority here." "Chief, this is territorial land, federal jurisdiction. It is Apache land." Naich corrected calmly, "Stolen by treaty and law, but Apache land nonetheless. My nephew has asked for sanctuary. I grant it. The woman is now adopted into our tribe. She belongs to us, not to that man," he pointed at Crow, whose face had gone from triumphant to furious. "You cannot just adopt her." Crow shouted, "I have papers, legal contracts." "We have blood," Naich replied, "and blood is stronger than paper. She is Apache now, our sister. Our responsibility, your claim is ended." The standoff stretched taut as wire, 12 lawmen and hired guns facing 8 Apache warriors. Mathematics favored the marshals, but everyone present knew Apache warriors did not count odds the same way white men did. They would fight to the last man if pushed, and the cost would be measured in bodies. Finally, Marshal Hendricks made his decision, his shoulders sagging slightly. "We will report this to the territorial governor," he said. "Let him sort out the legal complications. I did not sign up to start an Indian war over one runaway servant." He turned to Crow, Your bounty does not extend to fighting Apache warriors. We are done here. Crow's protest was loud and profane, but ultimately meaningless. The marshals were already withdrawing, the hired guns following quickly, eager to be away from men who could put arrows through their eyes at 100 yards. Within minutes, the clearing was empty except for the Apache warriors and the two people they had come to save. Tahir stepped out of the cabin slowly, Ophelia beside him. He approached his uncle with the cautious respect due a chief and family elder. "Uncle," he said in Apache, "why did you come? How did you even know I was here?" Nate dismounted and embraced Tahir. A rare show of emotion from a man known for stoic control. "We have been tracking you since Copper Bend," he said. Word travels fast when an Apache warrior wins a white woman in a shooting contest and then rides off with half the territory chasing him. He stepped back and looked at Ophelia, studying her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "So this is the woman worth risking everything for." Ophelia met his gaze steadily, not backing down despite the intensity of his scrutiny. "I am Ophelia Bancroft," she said clearly, "and I am grateful for your help, though I do not fully understand why you would risk your people for someone you do not know." Nature's stern expression softened slightly. "My nephew has been dead inside for many years, walking through the world like a ghost. Today I see him truly alive for the first time since his mother died. Any woman who can do that is worth protecting." He turned back to Tahir. "You cannot stay here, nephew. Crow will return with more men, more marshals. Eventually they will have enough force that even we cannot stop them. You need to truly disappear." "I know," Tahir said. "We were already planning to leave. Head west, maybe California." Nate shook his head. "Too obvious. Too many bounty hunters work those territories." He paused, considering. "There's another way. Come with us, both of you. Return to the people." "The reservation," Tahir said, his voice hardening. "That cage killed my mother." "Not the reservation," Nate corrected. "We left 6 months ago, small groups, quietly. Now we live in the old way, moving with the seasons, staying ahead of the soldiers. It is not easy, but it is free." He looked between Tahir and Ophelia. "You would both be welcome. The woman is already Apache by adoption. She can learn our ways, and you, nephew, can finally come home." Tahir looked at Ophelia, the question unspoken but clear in his eyes. She squeezed his hand and nodded slowly. Home is people. She had told him once, not place, and here was a people willing to accept them both. "We will come," Tahir said to his uncle, "at least for now, until we know what our future holds." "Then we leave immediately," Nash replied. "The marshals will need time to report and regroup, but that time is measured in days, not weeks. Gather what you need. We ride within the hour." As Tahir and Ophelia returned to the cabin to collect their few possessions, she leaned close and whispered, "Are you sure about this? Leaving your cabin, joining them? The cabin is just wood and stone." Tahir replied, "You are what matters, keeping you safe, keeping us together. If that means riding with my people, then that is what we do." She smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her in days. "Then let us ride," she said. "Let us find out what it means to be truly free." And as they prepared to leave, to join the Apache band waiting in the clearing, both felt something they had almost forgotten. Hope for a future that held more than running and hiding. Hope for a life built on their own terms. The Blood Rider and his love, riding toward a new beginning. Together, 6 months had passed since the day Chief Nate led them away from the cabin. 6 months of learning to live as part of the band, moving with the seasons through territories the government claimed but could not control. Ophelia had adapted to Apache life with a determination that earned respect from even the most traditional elders. She learned to tan hides until her hands grew calloused and strong, to gather and prepare wild foods that sustained them through lean times, to speak the language with increasing fluency that amazed those who remembered her arrival. The pale servant girl from Copper Bend had been transformed into someone stronger, someone who belonged. The transformation had not been easy. Those first weeks had tested her in ways neither of them anticipated. The physical labor left her exhausted and aching. The language barrier frustrated her efforts to communicate. The curious stares from band members made her feel constantly watched and judged. But she persisted with a stubbornness that reminded Tahir why he had fallen in love with her. She asked questions, accepted correction without defensiveness, threw herself into every task with the intensity of someone who understood that belonging had to be earned. Tahir watched her now as she worked beside the other women, teaching them a more efficient way to preserve meat she had learned on the farm where she had been indentured, demonstrating the technique with patient repetition until they mastered it. The exchange of knowledge went both ways, White and Apache learning from each other, building something new from old traditions. She looked up and caught him staring, smiled in that way that still made his heart skip despite the months they had been together, despite sharing a wickiup and a life and dreams of the future. The band had made winter camp in a hidden valley where hot springs kept the ground from freezing. 23 people total, including children, living in traditional wickiups covered with hides and brush. It was not an easy life, but it was a free one, and freedom had proven more valuable than comfort. Chief Mach approached Tahir where he sat repairing the saddle. His uncle's face was thoughtful, contemplative in a way that usually meant serious conversation was coming. "Walk with me, nephew," Nash said. "There are things we must discuss." They walked to the edge of camp where they could speak privately. The winter sun hung low in the sky, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pink. Nature was silent for a long time, letting the peace of the moment settle before breaking it with words. Finally he spoke. "You have done well these past months. Both of you, the woman especially. She has surprised many who thought she would not last a week." "Ophelia is stronger than she looks," Tahir replied. "Stronger than even she knew before circumstances forced her to discover it." Nache nodded. "Which is why I must tell you what I have learned. A trader came through 3 days ago. He brought news from Copper Bend. Virgil Crow is dead." Tahir felt the words hit him like a physical blow. "Dead how?" "Shot in his own office," Maish said. "By the hunter he hired to track you. Seems Crow refused to pay what he owed. Said the hunter failed to deliver what was promised." The hunter disagreed with his assessment. "And the bounty?" Tahir asked, his mind already racing through implications. "Gone," Nache replied. "Crow had no family, no one to inherit his business or his vendettas. The territorial marshal declared the matter closed. Officially you are both free to go wherever you wish." Tahir stood silent, trying to process what freedom actually meant after so long running. No more looking over his shoulder, no more fear that every stranger might be coming to collect a reward. Just the future, open and uncertain, and theirs to shape. "What will you do?" Nash asked, "now that you can choose without fear?" Tahir looked back toward camp, toward Ophelia laughing with the other women, toward the life they had built in these months of exile. "I think we stay," he said, "at least through winter. Maybe longer. This is the first place that has felt like home since before the reservation." Nache placed a hand on Tahir's shoulder. "You are always welcome here. Nephew, you and your woman both. You have earned your place among us." That evening Tahir found Ophelia by the hot springs. She sat on a flat rock with her feet in the steaming water, her face turned toward the sunset. He settled beside her and took her hand. "There is news," he said, and told her everything Nash had shared. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time, her fingers tightening around his. "So we are free," she said finally, "truly free. No one hunting us, no one claiming ownership." "Yes," Tahir confirmed. "We can go anywhere, do anything. The choice is ours." Ophelia turned to look at him, her pale eyes reflecting the orange light of sunset. "What do you want?" "Tahir, if you could have anything, what would you choose?" "This," he said without hesitation. "You, this life, these people. I spent years thinking I needed to be alone to be safe. That connection meant vulnerability, but these months with you, with the band, have taught me that isolation is not safety. It is just another kind of death." She leaned her head against his shoulder. I feel the same, she said softly. I thought freedom meant running away from everything that hurt me, starting over somewhere no one knew my past. But real freedom is being able to stay, to build something with people who accept you as you are. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dropped below the mountains and the first stars emerged, brilliant points of light in the darkening sky. The air grew colder with the sun's departure, and Tahir pulled a blanket around both their shoulders, sharing warmth in the way they had learned to share everything. Finally, Ophelia spoke again, her voice carrying a nervous hope that made him turn to look at her fully. There is something else I need to tell you, something I have been waiting for the right moment to say. Tahir turned to face her fully, concern touching his features as he searched her expression for clues. What is it? Are you unwell? Has something happened? I am with child, she said, her hand moving to her stomach in an unconscious protective gesture. About 3 months along. The elder women confirmed it last week. They said I am healthy, that the baby is strong. But I wanted to wait until I was certain before telling you. Tahir felt the world tilt beneath him. A child, his child, their child. A future he had never let himself imagine suddenly becoming real and immediate and terrifying in its vulnerability. The fear hit him first, sharp and cold. The memory of losing his own family, of watching his mother waste away, of burying everyone he had ever loved. The terror of having something so precious to lose threatened to overwhelm him. Say something, Ophelia whispered, her own fear evident now in the trembling of her voice. Tell me what you are thinking. Are you angry, disappointed, afraid? But then he looked at Ophelia's face, saw the hope and fear warring there. And he realized she needed him to be strong, to believe in the future they were building. He pulled her close and held her, feeling her heart beat against his chest. Are you happy? She whispered into his shoulder. Or are you afraid? Both, he admitted, terrified and happier than I knew was possible. All at once, she pulled back enough to see his face. We can do this, she said with quiet certainty. Raise a child, build a life, be a family. We have survived everything else, we can survive this too. Not just survive, Tahir said, his hand joining hers on her stomach. Thrive. Our child will grow up free, surrounded by people who love them. Learning both our people's ways, they will have what we lost. The months that followed were a time of preparation and growing anticipation. The band embraced the news of the coming child with joy, treating it as a sign of hope for the future. Ophelia's pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite the harsh conditions. The elder women watching over her with experienced care. Tahir found himself changing in ways he had not expected. The hard edges that had defined the blood rider softening as he prepared to become a father. He built a larger wickiup for them, gathered supplies for the baby, learned songs his mother had sung to him as a child so he could pass them on. Spring arrived with the rushing sound of snowmelt and the return of green to the valley. And with it came Ophelia's time. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through a full night and into the next day. Tahir waited outside the birthing wickiup with the other men, pacing like a caged animal, jumping at every sound. When the cry of a newborn finally pierced the morning air, he nearly fell to his knees with relief. Moments later, one of the elder women emerged, her weathered face creased with a smile. You have a son, she announced. Healthy and strong, already angry at the world. Tahir entered the wickiup to find Ophelia exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. Meet your son, she whispered. The baby was perfect. Small and red-faced and furious, with a shock of black hair and eyes that would darken to match Tahir's in time. Tahir reached out with trembling hands and took his son, feeling the solid weight of new life, of future and hope made flesh. What should we name him? Ophelia asked. Tahir thought of his mother, of everything lost and everything gained. Kwan, he said, the Apache word for fire, because he is the light that will guide us forward. Quan, Ophelia repeated, testing the sound. I love it. Then in English, fire, our little fire. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Filled with the small joys and struggles of raising a child in a community, constantly moving to stay ahead of the government's reach. Quan grew strong and quick, learning to ride before he could walk steadily. Speaking both Apache and English with equal fluency. Understanding that he belonged to two worlds and needed to honor both. He asked endless questions about everything. Absorbing knowledge like dry earth soaking up rain. Tahir taught his son the skills he would need to survive. Tracking, hunting, reading the signs of weather and terrain. But more importantly, he taught him the values that made survival worthwhile. Compassion, courage, the importance of protecting those weaker than yourself. Quan listened with the serious attention of a child, who understood these lessons were not just stories, but the foundation of who he would become. Ophelia taught their son different lessons. Patience, the healing properties of plants. The value of learning from everyone regardless of their background. She told him stories of her own struggles and triumphs, making sure he understood that strength came in many forms. That surviving degradation and choosing not to become degraded yourself was its own kind of warrior path. The band grew as well, others joined them over the years. Apache fleeing the reservation's misery. A few white outcasts seeking freedom from their own society's constraints. Even two Mexican families who had been driven from their land and found acceptance among people who understood displacement. Tahir and Ophelia became elders in their own right, teaching the children, settling disputes with wisdom born from their own heart experiences, helping guide the band through changing times that seemed to grow more dangerous with each passing season. Chief Naish eventually passed leadership to Tahir. A ceremony held under the full moon with the entire band gathered. The old chief's hands trembling slightly as he transferred the responsibility to younger shoulders, recognizing that the future required someone who could bridge both Apache and white worlds. Someone who had lived in both and been broken by both and survived to build something new. It was a heavy responsibility, but Tahir carried it with the same fierce determination he had once reserved for survival alone, now channeled toward protecting and nurturing an entire community. On a spring morning 10 years after the day at the Copper Bend Fair, Tahir sat outside his wickiup watching Quan practice with a bow. The boy was 9 now, tall for his age, with his father's serious demeanor and his mother's quick mind. He had his father's aim too, hitting targets the other children missed. Ophelia emerged from the wickiup, their second child. A daughter named Istis, meaning snow, balanced on her hip. The girl was 3, with her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's dark eyes, already showing signs of the stubborn independence both parents possessed. She settled beside Tahir, comfortable in the silence they had learned to share. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Staying here instead of going to California or Oregon, building a normal life?" Tahir considered the question seriously, looking at his family. At the band moving through their morning routines. At the mountains standing eternal against the blue sky. Every decision has a cost. He said finally, "But no, I do not regret this. How could I regret the best thing that ever happened to me?" He turned to look at her. Seeing the girl from the platform transformed into a woman of strength and purpose. "That day at the fair, when I shot those 6 cans, I thought I was just saving one person from a bad situation. But you saved yourself too," Ophelia finished. "We saved each other." "Yes," Tahir agreed, pulling her close. His family complete in his arms. "We saved each other. And built something neither of us could have built alone." In the distance, Qwen's arrow found its mark, the boy shouting in triumph. And Tahir felt the weight of the past finally lift, replaced by the solid presence of a future worth fighting for, worth living for, worth every hard mile that had brought them here. The Blood Rider was gone, that name buried with the man he used to be. In his place stood Tahir Warhawk, husband, father, leader of his people. A man who had found redemption not through violence, but through love. Not through isolation, but through connection. And beside him stood Ophelia, no longer a servant, no longer property, but a free woman who had claimed her own destiny and helped shape the destiny of a people. Together they watched their children grow, their community thrive, and knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together, unbroken, free. The story that began with 6 tin cans and a desperate gamble had become something greater than either of them had imagined. A legacy of courage and love that would echo through generations. Proof that even in the hardest times, even when the world seemed determined to crush hope, two souls could find each other and build something beautiful from the broken pieces. And that was worth more than all the gold in California, more than all the safety in the world. Worth everything they had risked and everything they had lost to claim it. Their story, written in their own hands, lived on their own terms, free at last.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.